Now, there are many cases where it's a lot easier to grab objects with two hands as opposed to just one. For example, trying to pick up heavy objects such as couches, chairs, or even large rocks. Or even when trying to control something a little bit better, such as guns, swords, or whatever have you. So in this video, I'm going to show you a very simple setup for two-handed grabbing that can work on just about any actor in any project. But before we go ahead and jump to that, if you enjoyed this video and want to see even more just like this one, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below. And with that, let's jump right into the video. So now let's go ahead and jump right into this. So I want to start by opening up the content browser, and before we actually get started on our blueprints, our interfaces, all that kind of stuff, I want to have a quick look at our skeletal mesh that we're going to be using. So I'm going to be using this SKFP gun. Now, if I recall correctly, this is at the very least now brought in as part of the Unreal Engine 5 VR template. I believe it's also still part of the first-person template. I don't know that this will be included if you're using the VR template in Unreal Engine 4. You may have to import it. But this is what we're going to be using in order to set up this two-handed grab. So I don't actually need to do anything here to the skeletal mesh itself. What I do need access to is the skeleton. So here, I like to do a couple things. So I like to make sure that we have a grip point here. I'm also going to rotate this. This default point is not what I want it to be at. I want to set this X actually to 45. And the reason for this is we're actually be using this grip point in order to offset when we're only grabbing with a single hand. When we're grabbing with a single hand, we're automatically going to be gripping here at our main point. So I want to make sure that this rotation is correct, that it's where we want it, and so we can use this rotation as our offset. I also want to go right up here, and to our grip bone, I want to add a socket. This is entirely optional. You don't have to do this part, but I'm going to set up a secondary grip socket. You can also call it like grip point or whatever. But what I want to do to this is I'm going to move this 35 on the X and 5 up on the Z. And this is going to be where our second grip point is for our hand. You don't have to do this part. What I like to do with this is, I'll be showing you in the blueprint, but I like to use this socket in order to attach a collision right here at the muzzle of our gun. So that way we can actually check to see if our second hand is within range of the secondary grip socket. So like I said, you don't have to do this. It's just a preference of mine. So let's go ahead and save out of this, and I'm going to return to our VR template. I'm going to leave open this skeleton because we will need to make sure that we have correct names here for later on. So I'm going to leave that skeleton open. And let's go and minimize that. Now, before we go and start on our main blueprint, I want to create an interface here. So let me go and create a new folder first. I'm going to call this interfaces. And in here, under blueprints, I want to create a blueprint interface called grab. Now, I've done this plenty of times in previous tutorials. You guys have probably seen this if you've seen any of my previous tutorials where grabbing is involved. These are going to be pretty standard. We have a grab and release function, which as you can see, I just added in. And then I want to give each of these a motion controller input. So, motion controller component object reference. And the same here for release. We're going to have a motion controller input. There we go. And go and compile and save that. We don't need to leave that open, so I'm going to close that out. So now we can get to work on our main blueprint that we're going to be using to grip in two places. This is where we're going to set up our two-handed grip. So I'm going to go and head back into our content browser. I'm going to create another new folder here, and this is going to be called Blueprints. And in here is where we're going to create an actor blueprint. I'm just going to call this I'll just call it gun, because quite frankly, that's what this is going to be. This is a gun. We're just going to be grabbing at two spots. So here's our main actor here. So I'm going to start by adding in a skeletal mesh so we have something to attach our gun to. I'm going to set this to SKFP guns. That is our gun. I'm also going to set this as our root component just because we're not going to be using the default root. It's just going to make things a little bit simpler. And then I'm also going to add in two sphere collisions. I'm going to call this first one main grip, collision. And then I'm going to create a second one, sphere collision. And this one I'm going to call secondary grip collision. And make sure that each of these are attached to the skeletal mesh itself, not to each other or anything like that. So now this is where, like I said, I like to have a second socket set up at our secondary grip. So we're going to use those sockets in order to attach our collisions here. So we can do that by using our parent sockets. So for our main grip collision, I'm going to click down here, and it was called grip point was our main collision. So if you look back here, this is our grip point right here. And then our secondary grip socket is right over here. So I'm going to go back into our gun. Under secondary grip collision, I'm going to again go under parent socket. I'm going to grab our secondary grip socket. You can see it snaps both of our collisions straight to the points that we want them to be at. And you can also see that we have a bit of an overlap, and these collisions are a little bit large. You probably want something quite a bit smaller. So I'm also going to take our main grip collision, decrease that size to, I think 13 should be pretty good. I basically want it to cover up the entire trigger area. This is where we're going to detect our main grip. I think that's a pretty good collision there, so I'm going to go and leave that. And our secondary, I'm also going to set to 13, I believe. 13. I think 13 is pretty good. You may choose to make it a bit smaller, a bit bigger. This is just a good collision for me. Now, before we go too much further, I want to clarify something right now. Because motion controller collisions can be a little bit finicky, they can be a little bit weird to work with sometimes, what I'm going to be doing is I won't be using these collisions as you may typically expect. I'm not going to be checking for overlap components. I won't be checking for overlap actors. What I will be doing is I'll be actually using this sphere in order to get a sense of how far our motion controller can be out. This is more of a visual to let us know where our motion controller can be in terms of the gun. What we're going to be doing instead is in the event graph, we're going to be checking to see if our motion controller is within the radius of this sphere. It'll be a little bit easier to work with, and we don't have to sort through overlapping actors, components. We also don't have to fight with collisions. It'll just overall simplify a lot of things for our gun here. So with that, before we go and jump into our event graph, I also want to jump into our class settings. And here under implemented interfaces, I want to add our grab interface that we made earlier on in the tutorial as well. And that's all that we need for the initial setup here. So I'm going to go and jump into our event graph here. And I'm going to remove this begin plate and actor begin overlap. We won't be using either of these. We will be using the tick. This is going to be used in order to actually rotate our gun to make it look as though two hands are gripping the gun. I do want to make sure that that's also stated that we're not actually going to be attaching our gun to each hand. We're actually going to be making it look as though our gun is attached to each hand. So I'll show you how that looks here in a minute. But before we go and move on to our tick, I want to start by taking our grab and release interfaces, and I want to implement each of those. I'm actually going to move these up top as well. I like having these first since we're going to be working on these first. And now we can go ahead and get started on implementing our blueprint. So let's go and start here by working on our grab. I've gone ahead and given myself quite a bit of room because we are going to need quite a bit of room in order to add in all of our blueprint here, especially because I'm going to try and make this as organized as possible. So before we go ahead and start, I'm going to get a reference to our main grip collision and our secondary grip collision. We're going to be starting with our main grip, but I'm grabbing a reference right now to our secondary, so that way we have that when the time comes. So to start out, I'm going to grab our motion controller that we're passing through the grab, and I'm going to get the world location of our motion controller. I also want to get the world location of our main grip collision. And using this, I want to get a distance between these two locations. And we can actually do this by simply getting the distance between two vectors just like this. So nice and simple there. And that leaves us with an output float value that we can use in order to get a distance. So what I'm going to do is using this distance, I want to check to see if it is less than or equal to, and I'm going to get from our main grip collision, I'm going to get sphere radius. It'll be right here at the bottom. And that's going to go into our B node here for our less than equal. And that is going to check to see if the motion controller that we're passing through is within the range of our main grip collision. So I'm going to go and feed that through a branch. And we're going to do a couple things. So first, let me go and connect that Boolean there. Now, to start out, we're going to need to do a couple things here. So first, we're going to need to get a reference to the motion controller. We're going to need to store this value for later on. So I'm going to take our motion controller. I'm going to promote this to a variable. Go and pull that over and just reroute the node a bit. There we go. There we go. I'm going to go and rename this variable here to main grip controller. This is going to be our main motion controller. This is what's going to be positioned right at the trigger point of our gun. So that way we can actually get a reference to this later on when we are rotating our gun. Then, using this, we're going to want to take our skeletal mesh. I'm going to put it down here. And I want to attach component to component. So what I'm going to do is our main grip controller is going to go into the parent. As you can see, our skeletal mesh is already in the target. And I'm going to set our location to snap to target as well as our rotation. And our scale I'm going to set to keep world. Now the location rotation, to be honest, probably don't really matter. I'm only doing it just to make sure that we have the gun roughly at the point where our motion controller is. We're actually going to then modify the location of our actor so that way we can actually make sure that our location rotation is where we want it. So in order to do this, I'm going to set actor relative transform. And for this transform, our new relative transform, I'm going to get a second reference to our skeletal mesh to help keep things organized. And I want to get socket transform. Now, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have a couple sockets positioned at the trigger as well as at the muzzle of our gun. So what we're going to do is for our in-socket name, I'm going to jump into our skeleton and I want to make sure that it's this grip point right here because this is the grip point that I set up at the beginning. You can also see we've already modified the rotation location, which you should recall. So I'm going to go and grab the socket name that we have up here. I'm going to pass that into our in-socket name. Then in our transform space, I want to set this to RTS actor, and that will actually set our gun to our motion controller. It will also rotate it and set the relative transform based off of the location and rotation that we assign to this grip point on our skeleton. So now we're all done with our main grip setup. Now we need to move on to our secondary grip. So before we even start over here, we're going to be using a lot of what you already see over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take our branch that we had set up here at the beginning of the event grab, and I'm going to, out of our false, I'm going to run another branch. The reason for this is I want to make sure that we cannot possibly in any way have one motion controller set for both of our grip points. And so what this will do is we're first going to check if our main grip is valid, if we can actually set the motion controller here to the main grip. If we can't, and only if we can't, then we want to consider setting it up for our secondary grip, which we're going to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to copy all of this because we're going to be doing basically this exact same setup. So I'm going to take our motion controller, that's going to go into our first roll location here. And then our secondary grip collision is going to be going into the second roll location as well as the target for our sphere radius. And that's going to be for our branch there. Let me go and bring that down a bit more. Then we can go and take our motion controller. As you can see, I already have a reroute node that's running over here. So I'm just going to take this one. I'm going to promote this to a variable. Where did it go? That was weird. Let's go ahead and set that variable real quick. And that value can go in there. So this value I'm going to set to secondary grip controller. Now we're ready to work on our release. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start by creating a sequence here. Now we're going to be using branches here, so if you want, you can use branches instead. And you can do basically the same setup here where out of the false of our first branch, you can continue on. I like to do this just because it's not going to make any of a difference. We've already made sure that we cannot possibly have a single motion controller set for both our main and secondary grips. So it's not really going to matter here at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our motion controller here and I'm going to check to see if it's equal to our main grip controller. Now, if it is, we're going to go ahead and feed this through a branch, and this branch is going to be set to our then 0. In case you're unfamiliar with sequences, basically it follows every execution node in order. So first it's going to run through 0, then it's going to run through 1. And if you add in additional pins, then it'll keep going and so on and so forth. But anyways, assuming that our motion controller that we are releasing with is our main controller, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to first set our main grip controller, there we go, back to null. I also want to set our secondary grip back to null. This really shouldn't make a difference again, but I like to do this just to make sure that all of our variables are reset back to their default states. And then I'm also going to want to detach from actor. And there we go. I'm going to set all these to keep world as well in order to make sure that everything stays the same. Now on our then 1, we're going to do some of the same stuff. I'm going to again take our motion controller. I'm going to check to see if it is equal to this time our secondary grip actor. There we go. And that's again going to be fed through a branch. This is going to go through our then 1. Okay, now assuming that our secondary grip controller is the one that we're passing through our event release, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to set our secondary grip back to null. We're not going to need any references to this. Then I'm going to grab our main grip controller and I want to convert this to validated get because we're going to be doing a couple things depending on if this is valid or if it's not. Presumably our main grip controller should be valid. So if it is valid, we're simply going to repeat what we did right up here. So that way we can make sure our main grip is reattached and it's at the correct position. So I've just copied this section from up here and I'm going to pass that through to our is valid. And this will reset our transform so that way we are now at the correct location rotation. Otherwise, we're just going to again detach from actor. Presumably this is what's going to run because if our secondary grip is releasing, then our main grip should still be active. We've pretty much made sure of that up here, but just in case, I also want to set all this to keep world as well. Now that we're finally all set up here, now we can move on to our event tick. This is going to be the final stage that we have to finish here in our gun before we can move on to our player and finish everything off. So here in our event tick, this is where we're going to control the rotation of our skeletal mesh to make it look as though our gun is following each of our hands. This is what actually makes it look as though each of our hands are grabbing onto the gun. So to start out, we first need to make sure that our main grip controller and our secondary grip controller are both valid. So I'm going to get each of these and I'm going to get is valid for each. And in order to check if each of these are both valid, I'm just going to run this through an AND Boolean. There we go. And now we can run that through a branch. And we're only going to be doing with the true here. We're not going to be doing anything with the false because we're only concerned with if both of our hands are gripped. So now that that's out of the way, now we can move on to actually rotating our gun. So the way that this is going to work, I'm just going to grab references to each of our controllers again, just to help keep things organized. I'm going to get the world location of each. Get world location. And I want to find look at rotation. Our main grip controller is going to go into our start, that world location. Our secondary grip controller is going to go into target. You do want to make sure of this. Because this is since we're actually going to be setting up our rotation and its offset in order to face forward from our main grip to our secondary grip. So if your skeletal mesh looks different, you may find that you need a different offset. than what I'm going to do here. So for our offset, I'm going to combine, and our Z needs to go into -90. The reason for this is if we don't set this offset for -90 with the combined rotators, what it'll actually look like is our gun will actually be 90 degrees off on our Z. So it'll still technically follow around our hand, it just won't be facing the correct direction that we want. So now using our final rotation value that we get here out of our combined rotators, we'll have to do some modifications to it, but we'll be using some of these values in order to set our final rotation on our gun. So I'm going to start by setting actor rotation. Our true from our branch over here is going to go into that set actor rotation, so that's from our vent tick. And then using this, I'm going to split each of our struck pins here. And we need to do a few things here. So I'm going to start by taking our Z. That's going to go straight into Z. We're not going to be doing anything to that. Our pitch, we're going to multiply by -1. This is going to invert our value because for whatever reason our pitch works in the opposite direction that we want it. And our pitch actually supplies our roll, so we're actually going to feed that into our roll. There we go. And then finally, for our main grip controller, I'm going to get the rolled rotation of our main grip. I'm going to split that, and our roll that we get from our rolled rotation is going to go into our pitch here. And the reason for this is I just think it's a little bit nicer to use this roll versus this one. This roll doesn't typically tend to work correctly, so this actually allows for us to rotate our gun and basically rotate left and right if we wanted to maybe like look around a corner or something like that. And with that, that is our entire gun done. So that was quite a bit of a blueprint that we had to add in there. So now we can go and compile and save that. And I'll go and close out of our gun. We're not going to need our skeleton open anymore, so if you want, you can go and close that as well. And now I'm going to go ahead and open up our VR pawn. So let's go and pass that through. And in here, I'm going to grab our grab left and our grab right. If you've seen any of my previous tutorials, a lot of this, again, should be pretty standard. You should be able to fly through this. If you've seen any of my previous tutorials on anything that has to do with grabbing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a sphere overlap actors, pass that through pressed. Our sphere position, we're going to go ahead and get our motion control left because we're on grab left. I'm going to get the world location. That's going to be passed into the sphere position. Sphere radius, I'm going to set to 20. The object type, I'm going to make an array. This is going to be world dynamic. And then from this out actors, I'm going to do a for each loop with a break. There we go. And then using this array element, I'm going to see if it implements interface, grab, and assuming that it does, let me go and create a branch here. Assuming that it does, we're going to take this and we're first going to promote this to a variable. There we go. And that's going to be our left grab actor. We're then going to take this and I'm going to grab. You'll likely find the grab message down here at the bottom. Our motion controller left is going to be passed in here. And then I'll go and feed that around to our break in order to get out of this for each loop. This will just kind of call our grab and release functions that we had made earlier on. And it'll automatically break out once we found the first object that implements this grab interface. And then once we've done all that, then we're going to take our grab left actor, and first I'm going to convert this to a validate get. And then on released, I'm going to check if it's valid, and then if it is, we're going to first release, again passing through our motion controller left here. And then we will just go ahead and set our left grab actor back to null. Now I'm just going to copy all of this down here for our grab right, and we're going to make a few modifications here. I'm not going to use any of this because most of this is stuff that we're not going to be using, so I'm going to feed through again our motion controller right, And then over here, I'm going to, again, promote this to variable. This is going to be our right grab actor. Pass that through to true. There we go. We just need to modify all of our inputs and outputs here. Our motion controller right is going to go right there. And then finally, right back down here, I'm again going to get our right grab actor, and we're just going to repeat what we did up here. So pass that through released. We're then going to release message, pass through our motion controller right. Ooh, that was the wrong one. Motion controller right. And then we can finally set our right grab actor back to null. And there we go. So that is our player all set up. Nice, quick, simple. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. And then I'm going to go ahead and, in our blueprints, drop our gun into the scene. This side should be pretty good. This should all work pretty nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into VR and we can give this a look. All right, so here's our gun. As you can see, I moved it a little bit closer to me. I've already grabbed it because it was a little bit further out over there than I would have liked. So I moved it a little bit closer to me and just kind of grabbed it and pulled it over. So you can actually see here we have our gun here. Pretty simple so far. You can see I can grab it with either hand and I can pull it away as well. You can see too, I can't, of course, trigger the release with the opposite hand. I can only grab around the trigger of the gun as well. So you can actually see if I grab like around the stock, around the magazine, the muzzle, anything like that, it won't work. I have to grab it right here at the grip, at our main grip point here. Now, if I go ahead and grab it here at our main grip, I can go and take our second hand, grab right there, and you can see that I can move it around nice and pretty smoothly. Yeah, it works pretty well. And I can also rotate here with our right hand as well. This was part of why you may recall that I grabbed the rotation from our right hand. That roll doesn't really work well when you're doing the motion controllers, at least for something like this, in my opinion. But you can actually see that this gives us a very nice looking gun to use. And you can see too, if I go and point it like at myself and then release, it snaps back to my other hand. There is one limitation with something like this. I can move my hand way further out from the muzzle, which does kind of ruin the whole point of this. Quite frankly, this gun's kind of big, so you really wouldn't do something like that easily. If you wanted to kind of keep your motion controller attached here, you'd probably want to have like a skeletal mesh or a static mesh that's attached to your motion controller, attaches to the gun when you grab it, and then attaches back to your hand when you release. And that's probably how you'd end up fixing something like that. But otherwise, it's a pretty nice, it's a very simple two-handed grip here. It works pretty well. So yeah, there you go. And with that, that's how we put together a very simple two-handed setup that can work on just about any actor. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below. And also, I'll give a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters who you should see over here on the right-hand side. And with that, I'll see you in the next reality.